Dear friends, this evening I am extremely delighted and welcome all of you for this exciting series of online webinar on wider contextual biblical hermeneutics, jointly organized by the Church of South India and Ecumenical Christian Center, Bangalore. It is a greatest honor for me to introduce a great scholar by name Sister Dr. Bincy Mathew, SH. Sister Dr. Bincy Mathew studied bachelor's degree in philosophy and theology in Dharmaram, Bangalore. Sister Dr. Bincy Mathew has completed her doctorate in biblical studies from the Catholic University Leuven, Belgium, under the supervision of a most dynamic and profound New Testament scholar, Professor Raymond Beringer, Germany. Sister Dr. Bincy Mathew is a professor of the New Testament and controller of examinations at Alpha Institute of Theology and Science, Thalassery, Kerala. Sister Dr. Bincy Mathew belongs to the Nirmal province, Mananthavadi of the Sacred Heart Congregation. She has been teaching in various theological institutes and also presenting scholarly papers in various local and international theological journals. This evening, she'll be presenting a most important and most fascinating topic on the Passion of Jesus in the Gospels. I cordially welcome Sister Dr. Bincy Mathew to take over this time to present a paper. Over to Sister Dr. Bincy Mathew.
Thank you. Thank you, Sukumar sir, for introducing me. Thank you for your good words. You have got more things than I expected about me. Good evening to all.
Good evening.
Respected coordinators, Ecumenical Christian Center and also Church in South India, and all the organizers, respected participants. Thank you for inviting me to present a paper as part of your course on the New Testament. As you all agree, entering into the New Testament, very especially the Passion narratives in the Gospel, is like entering into a minefield. It is possible that wherever you step, there can be an explosion, because there are many things that are not yet questioned or not yet answered in the Passion narrative story. So here, today we are going to enter into that minefield, but I'm not going very deeper into it. But we understand today the Passion narratives and what are the stories and what it would tell us about our life. So today we are going to see Passion, a terminological understanding, and then we analyze the four Gospels, especially Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, and the Passion narrative in these Gospels. And then we make a short contemporary reading of the Passion narrative. If you all remember, the first title I got from Dr. Johnson when he invited me, or when he asked me to present this, to take this class, he gave me the title Passion Narratives in the Synoptic Gospels. And I just wanted, oh my God, my doctorate is in John, and Dr. Johnson asked me to give a lecture on Synoptic Gospels. So I was a little bit worried, because that is not my very familiar field, I would say. For John, I could say something. Okay, then I took it as a challenge to enter into that minefield. So now, as a changed title, we have all four Gospels. Here, we will enter into all the four Gospels in a short way, and then we will see what are the characteristics or what are the peculiarities and what theology each of these evangelists is bringing. So, as you all might know, how would one understand the formation of the gospel tradition? We would ask how all these 4 gospels were written, or how it started, whether it starts from the infancy narratives to the resurrection of Jesus, or it started from resurrection of Jesus to the infancy narratives. These are some of the questions all Christians ask in their mind. So I would say, as we understand each gospel, there are 3 different phases of the gospel formation. First one is the kerygma centered on the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. So it's not the infancy narratives, but it started with the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. And the content of their proclamation, as we see Acts 2:32, you killed Jesus by hanging or crucifying him, but God raised him up. So this was the content of their earliest proclamation, I would say. Secondly, when they started reflecting on Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, they started to think what happened before that. So that is the early life of the one whom they are proclaiming. Okay, this has caused in remembering Jesus' public ministry. So when they have written that, or they formed it, they started thinking how he was born and how he was brought up. So the reflection on the very early life of Jesus. So these are the 3 phases. Now you might understand that the first formed part of the gospel is Jesus's crucifixion or passion narrative, we would say, and the resurrection narratives. That was very close to them, in fact, when they started preaching. So this gospel formation actually affected also by the Sitz im Leben. That means the surrounding situation or the living situation, experience of the early Christian communities. So I have just numbered 2, there could be many more. Roman imperial law. So Jesus was a criminal for Romans who was sentenced to death by Pilate, we know that one. So this was their conceived idea. Now, the second one is a kind of problematic relationship between early church and the synagogue. Okay, so now we understood passion narrative is one among the very last moments of Jesus. That was the content of the early Christian proclamation. And 2 backgrounds. Let's keep that in our mind. And then we will move on to the terminology. When we say passion, which terminology can come to our mind or they used? So we have first Pasco, that means experience, undergo, suffer, endure, etc. If we look into the New Testament, we have 42 times this word is appearing, very especially in the synoptics and then in the Pauline letters and in the Hebrews. And 35 times out of 42, this is referring to the suffering of Christians or of the suffering of Jesus. So we have 35 times. It either refers to Christ's suffering or the suffering of Christians. Some example, 1 Thessalonians 2:14, this word Pasco or suffering or experience refers to the suffering of Christians in persecution, those who are in persecution. In the letter to the Philemon 1:29, it is a grace to suffer for him, that is Christ. So to be subjected to persecution for the sake of Christ. Now, pointing to the coming glory and to the special bond with the crucified Christ is seen in some of the other references. So, in 2 Corinthians 1:6, Paul referred to his own affliction with the word Pascha. So here we would ask the content of the suffering. In Mark, we would say a collective term. Pasco stands as a collective term, is characterized more specifically by rejection and be killed. So it's a collective term. It includes many things, in fact. In Luke 22:15, 24:16, etc., and you can see some of the references there. Pasco refers to the events preceding Christ's resurrection or glorification. So the whole events come under the word Pasco. Now in 1 Peter 2:21 and 23, this word characterizes Jesus' passion as exemplary suffering. So we read, he suffered for you, leaving an example for you. Now related to that, we must understand also words for death, right? So two key corresponding Greek words are thanatos and apokthaino. Apokthaino means to kill and express any kind of violent ending of life. So it is something comes from outside. The meaning imply that. It can thus mean to kill or have put to death or murder and execute, etc. It is also related to the term teleuthao, that means to come to an end or complete or fulfill. This is very important word when we study John, because the whole passion narrative is related to this particular word. Okay, later it also came to mean to die or lose one's life. So apokthaino later took the meaning to die or lose one's life. The most significant term used to describe death in Greek is in fact thanatos. So we have made a small analysis on the terminology: Pasco, thanatos, and apokthaino. Okay, please keep that in your mind. Okay, now we see the order of the events in the passion narrative. In fact, among the scholars, there is a whole lot of discussion on where does it start and where does it end. So there are quite many opinions, and I just numbered 3 here, which I consider as important. So the passion narrative starts from the incarnation itself. So the whole divine condescension. So that divine condescension itself considered as a suffering experience. Okay, so some scholars would say it starts from the incarnation itself. Some would say it starts from Last Supper to burial. Okay, so if we consider that way, and I prefer to consider that way, then we can divide 3 phases: preparatory phase, the Last Supper, and the following incident, or the incidents just before the Last Supper, especially the anointing scene, etc. And then we have the passion proper, the whole events of Jesus' passion, and then after effects of passion, burial, etc. Now there is a third opinion. They would say this passion narrative starts from Gethsemane to burial. And most of the scholars hold this opinion, and this is a more traditional one. Okay, so I follow this traditional one in this lecture. So we move on now to the passion narrative in the Gospel of Mark. And as a whole, we can say that in the Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Mark, very especially in the passion narrative, Jesus is presented as the suffering Son of God. Mark hints Jesus' passion and death from very early on in his Gospel. Quite some examples are there. In Mark 1:14, John the Baptist is handed over to Herod, and eventually Herod, under the pressure of others, killed John the Baptist. This is in fact a point to Jesus' death and Jesus' suffering and death. Now in Mark 3:6, we see the decision of the Pharisees and Herodians to destroy Jesus. In Mark 8:31, 9:31, 10:33 to 34, we have Jesus himself predicts his own passion and his death. in Mark 11, we have the climax scene in the gospel in which Jesus goes to Jerusalem, and upon arrival, he purified the temple and declared that it must be a prayer house for all. So in fact, this particular event actually accelerated Jesus' arrest and crucifixion and death. This climatic incident finally cleared the mind of the priests and scribes to destroy Jesus, that we see in chapter 14, verses 1 to 2. Now in 14:3-9, after this declaration of Jesus' death, a woman anoints Jesus' body for his burial. So I will go detail into some of these events preceding the arrest, because we must get a picture of what is going on. I will not go to that detail when we deal with the other gospels. Okay, so we have now a symbolic plotting, because the chief priest and the authority wants to kill Jesus and they are plotting for it. And then we have the symbolic killing and the symbolic preparation of the burial anointing scene. Now start the actual drama of passion, death and burial. Here we see that Judas' agreement to betray Jesus at the promise of the money. We see it in verses 10-11. In between these incidents, Jesus has his final meal, the last meal, with his inner circle of disciples. Knowing that Judas will betray him, Jesus declares that he's willing to pour his life for many. This is very important to understand the meaning of Jesus' death in the Gospel of Mark. His pouring out of blood is the sign of new covenant that God makes with his people, that we see in verse 21. Now we are actually entering into the Paschal narrative in a traditional understanding. So we have the first event, Gethsemane, prayer and arrest, that we see in chapter 14, verses 26-52. So the decision of Jesus to leave the upper room after the Last Supper to the Mount Olives is also a decision to take the suffering that awaits him to bring the kingdom of God. Here we understand that the disciples' inability to accept passion and death of Jesus, the whole narrative would tell this one, the disciples' failure. They are told that they will be scattered. Jesus predicts the denial of Peter, but Peter and all others assure Jesus their fidelity. Now Jesus, knowing that he must suffer and die, plunges into the deadly pain and exclaims, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death." Yeah, we need to be careful of these words of Jesus, because Mark is actually presenting us the suffering Son of God. Passion is a real challenge for Mark and Jesus, because here we see the conflict between ideals and reality, as we all face in our life. Jesus' prayer that this cup might pass from him contradicts with his earlier saying that whoever would save his life will lose it. Here, Jesus is upset that the disciples, especially Peter, James, and John, could not watch 1 hour with him. It contradicts with his earlier prediction that they all will be scattered and Peter will deny Jesus. So he knows it already that they would be scattered or they will not stand with him. But even then, Jesus is upset of their reactions. However, Jesus finally accepts the will of the Father for the completion of the scriptures that we see in verse 49. In Mark, we do not find Jesus is replying to Judas when he came with others, and he kisses but no answer, and he does not reply to the violent action of someone very close to him. Thus Mark is actually differing from other gospels. When seeing Jesus' helplessness in resisting the evil forces, the disciples deserted Jesus and flew away. the very disciples who pledged few minutes ago to be with him have now abandoned Jesus. So this is the real situation of discipleship in the Gospel of Mark. The climax of that deserting is the fleeing of the young man in linen clothes to save his life, which is seen only in Mark 14:51. So we know that the young man leaving Jesus naked, even leaving everything. That's actually a climax point in which Mark shows us the utter failure of disciples. Now, here, according to scholars, or even in the narrative, we can see that Jesus experiences the total abandonment here. Now, what are the specific characteristics of Jesus here? He's very helpless, fragile, and he prays to the Father for the removal of the cup of suffering. He feels loneliness in the face of suffering, so that he pleads the disciples to be awakened with him. He receives no heavenly consolation, rather a complete silence. However, Jesus views passion as the betrayal into the hands of the sinners, and at the same time, very importantly, the passion as something God wants him to undergo. So this portrayal of Jesus as so troubled and distressed, even to the point of praying for the removal of suffering, has evoked so many questions in the mind of believers and non-believers as well. Why anguish at death? This is a question. Maybe an answer which even I find as quite okay, or my mind is at ease with this answer. So I would present that here. The book of Genesis explicates that God created human beings to be alive for eternity. There is a whole lot of question there, I know that, but how a human being should live, and what was the purpose of God in his mind when he created human beings until the fall of humankind. But the sin disrupted the entire plan of God for them. Death is considered as a distortion and punishment for sin. So flourishing of life to the extent of having life in its fullness is God's original desire for the creation. So why anguish at death is answered here, because this kind of death is not in the dictionary of God, I would say. So we move to the second part, the trial in the council and Peter's denial. We see that soon after the arrest, Jesus was led to the assembly of chief priests, elders, and scribes. So we must understand Jewish Sanhedrin enjoyed certain freedom in governance and judicial function under Roman rule. Then Mark presents Peter following Jesus enters the courtyard of high priest and warming at the fire. So Jesus is inside and Peter is outside. Jesus is there being questioned and he's all the more silent, but here Peter warming himself. So judicial trial begins with the false witness against Jesus. Here we see a gradation of witnesses and also the accusation against Jesus, first by many people and then by some, and finally chief priest himself accusing Jesus. An answer to it is Jesus's "I am" to the question of him being the Messiah. So the question centered around Jesus' messiahship. Each time, Mark is specific to emphasize that their testimony did not agree. That means Jesus is innocent. Finally, with a pathetic note, Mark narrates that all of them condemned Jesus deserving death. So this is the most painful situation here. Nobody is there to stand for Jesus. Here, we see that Jesus answered with "I am" to the question of the messiahship. We know that in the Gospels, from the very beginning till the end, Jesus is considered as the Son of God. Jesus is the Son of God. He is the son at his baptism. We know that, Mark 1:11. In transfiguration, at transfiguration, Father himself is proclaiming him as the son. And then Peter is confessing Jesus as the Messiah in chapter 8. So in his reply, Jesus reveals that he is also the Son of Man, who will appear at the end time to judge the world. Now, the chief priest, who wants to get rid of Jesus, makes use of Jesus' self-proclamation and pronounces it as blasphemy. There was no voice for Jesus. Instead, they started to mock and abuse him. Mark brings here the Isaiah's prophecy of suffering in two ways. Jesus' silence reminds Isaiah 53:7 and Isaiah 50 verse 6, Jesus' suffering at spitting and shaming. So we have Isaiah's prophecy is unfolding here. Now Jesus' reference to the temple, remember, made by the hands, and Jesus would say, I will make another temple not made by hands. This is a kind of replacement theme Mark is using. This theme was used by early Christians in their proclamation that church is the new temple of God. Now we see a kind of dark presentation of the discipleship here in the Gospel of Mark. So we see contrast between Jesus and Peter. Jesus affirms his identity as the Son of the Blessed, but Peter miserably fails to affirm his identity as the disciple. We know that his denial progressed towards to an oath. He is wearing an oath that I do not know this man. While at the high priest courtyard, Jesus was mocked, prophesied. But here at the courtyard of the high priest, Jesus' prediction that Peter would deny him come true. So here, what would be the aim of Mark in writing, in recording all these? This sharp contrast between Jesus and Peter. So the readers of Mark would find strength and courage to remain in faith even after denying, even after cursing Jesus at the wake of brutal persecutions. We must remember the whole context of Mark. Jesus seems to be very helpless here and receives the physical and mental torture. Now we move on to the Roman trial happening in chapter 15, 1 to 20. Now we have the pronouncement that Jesus deserved death. And Sanhedrin bound Jesus and delivered to Pilate. Why he delivered Jesus to the Pilate is unclear in Mark, but we see it's very clear in John, in fact. Now the whole issue regarding Jesus has shifted from a from a religious issue to a political one. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus here provides a clear answer. You have said so. Remember, in the Jewish trial, he was so silent. The chief priests and the elders make an arrangement with the crowd outside to ask for condemning Jesus and releasing murderous rebel Barabbas. Okay. Here, the stark contrast Mark brings here is that while the Gentile Pilate wants to do little justice to the accused one, Jesus' own people conspiring to get him crucified to secure their position and their power. So this trial also ends with mockery and cruel bodily and mental punishments. Jesus is mocked as a prophet in the first trial. He's mocked as a king in the second trial. That is the Roman trial. So, a sequence of handing over of Jesus, first by the disciple of Judas, and then by the chief priest, and finally by Pilate, hands over Jesus to be crucified. So we see here a sequence of handing over of Jesus too. Yeah. So that first by his own disciple, and then by his own people, that's the chief priest, and then finally by Roman governor Pilate. According to Mark, the death of Jesus is not only the result of one person or a group of persons. All this handing over shows us that the responsibility of Jesus' death is universal. Now we move on to the crucifixion, death, and burial. The narration of Jesus' crucifixion, death, and burial is very laconic. However, Mark provides certain minute details. Here you can see the Simon and then the offering of wine mixed with the myrrh. Then Mark is careful to arrange the incidents in a pattern of 3. 3 is a very favored number for Mark. So he arranges the incidents in a pattern of 3. So we have 3rd hour, 6th hour, 9th hours. And then we have 3 groups of people mocking Jesus, passers-by challenging Jesus, chief priests and scribes mock Jesus as the Messiah. The criminals who were crucified with Jesus also mock Jesus. Here, one factor that continuously evokes the mind of the reader of Mark is that the helplessness of Jesus and the human stubbornness at the innocent suffering. No voice is heard for Jesus. No sympathetic movement is extended to Jesus. He is totally abandoned by everyone. But we must remember that nature responds to this cruelty by closing its eyes from 6th to 9th hours, causing the earth to be filled with darkness. We see it in verse 33. At this utter abandoned feeling, Jesus cries out in his mother tongue, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, verse 34, which is the opening words of Psalm 22. Here, Jesus for the first time addresses the Father as God. Okay, let's leave that one. And we have someone here who offers wine mixed with the myrrh, reminds Jesus that he must face violent death, just as the Elijah, that is John the Baptist, in the Gospel of Mark. Yeah. Here, Jesus dies with a loud cry, which also reminds Joel, Book of Joel, chapter 2, verses 10 to 11, etc. I'm not going to read that one. Now, at the moment of Jesus' death, 2 symbolic actions took place. First is the tearing of the temple veil, and the second one is the centurion's proclamation that Jesus is the Son of God. Does it signify that the temple, which was made by hands, is abandoned by God, or does the tearing of the temple veil signifies the entrance of all, including the Gentiles, to the sacred space? Scholars have got different opinions, but I think it could be both, because in Mark we get these 2 answers, or these 2 symbolizations are correct. A number of persons share the proclamation of the centurion. So the witnesses are increasing now. Women who had ministered to him, those who came from Galilee, Joseph of Arimathea, the one from Sanhedrin. Here, the death of Jesus, the moment of death, also the moment of realization and faith. So why does Mark emphasize the suffering of Jesus to this extent? The possible answer could be to strengthen his own community that was undergoing severe persecution and martyrdom. Jesus' death here is the self-example Jesus sets for his disciples how to live a life salvific. So in sum, 2 interconnect themes are going on: portraits of Jesus as the Son of God, who is faithful to God the Father, and the failing disciples. We see some ironical twist in the narratives. We have seen the test of the disciples and 3 encounters in the passion narratives: Peter, Barabbas, the centurion. And Peter, who knew Jesus more than 3 years, fails to witness. Barabbas never met Jesus but benefited from his death. The centurion first met Jesus at the foot of the cross and he responded perfectly. So these are the examples or these are the faithful witness Mark leaves in our mind when we leave the passion narrative in his gospel. So we are going to the passion narratives in the Gospel of Matthew. I hold the opinion that Matthew follows Mark, or Mark is the source of Matthew, the very conventional understanding in order to avoid so many questions. So I'm not entering too much into Matthew because the narration is almost same as in Mark. But what are the differences? We will just highlight those differences in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew follows the storyline of his primary source, but adds his own themes and particularities. Matthew's narrative more carefully binds the passion and death of Jesus, the Messiah, to his role as teacher and the Son of Man who comes at the end of the age. So we can keep this in our mind, and then Matthew heightens the crime and death of Jesus' betrayer. So Judas is portrayed more with elaborate discussions. Notes a dream revelation to the wife of Pilate that Jesus is a righteous man. So Pilate's wife informs Pilate about her dream about Jesus. And then we have Pilate washing his hands to evade from the responsibility of Jesus' death. And we have some particular incidents happening at Jesus' death, earthquake and the resurrection of the saints that we did not see in Mark. And then Mark reports a posting of a guard at the tomb by the Jewish leaders to prevent the theft of Jesus' body. So I'm not going to the details here. Rather, we will now move on to the Gospel of Luke, because this is a little much different from the other two Gospels. Coming to the Gospel of Luke, we have a very different understanding of the passion narrative or Jesus here. He differs conceptually and theologically from the Mark and passion narrative, but follows the same sketch of the events. We have seen that Luke has got Jesus in chapter 9:51. Jesus sets his face to go to Jerusalem, thus affirming that Jesus knew everything going to happen here. Why he goes to Jerusalem is very clear for Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. It is also a time of the second active phase of Satan, who was not introduced in Mark and Matthew, as the readers were already told that Satan departed Jesus looking for another opportune time in chapter 4:13. Now, the opportune time of Satan is told as the power of darkness, and he is actually, and this power of darkness is actually entering into Judas, and this same power is trying to sift Peter. In Luke, we have rather a positive portrayal of the disciples. We are going to see a little bit different way of the characterization of disciples here. The disciples are those who were with Jesus in his trials, and Jesus assigns a kingdom for them, and they are promised that they would eat and drink at the table, etc. The innocence of Jesus is proved many ways, but in vain. Luke's passion narrative is inseparably connected to the Last Supper account. This is my conviction that we cannot separate Luke and passion narrative from the preceding incidents of Last Supper, etc. Okay, so here we move further. The Mount of Olives, prayer and arrest. We see it in chapter 22, verses 39 onwards. This scene is less suspenseful and dramatic compared to the other Gospels. So it is told that it was customary for Jesus to go there for prayer so that the betrayer could easily find him there. No words of desertion, denial, or betrayal on the way to the Mount of Olives. As we have seen already, in Mark and Matthew, we see all these desertion saying, denial saying, and the prediction of the betrayal, etc. But that is not found in Luke. Jesus is, in fact, not sorrowful to death. He prays as usual to the Father, submitting himself to the will of the Father. This is very important in Luke. Yeah, the Father sends an angel to assist him in his agony. This particular word is in fact very important, agonia, because this word denotes the whole tension an athlete has at the commencement of the competition. It's not like an agony of something going to happen, or it's not about that much suffering bodily or mentally. Yeah, mentally maybe, because an athlete is in whole tension, but this particular word denotes the tension, a creative tension an athlete has at the commencement of the competition. There is something to be conquered, right? So here Jesus calls Judas by name by his comments and explains that he knew already Judas' plan. Jesus heals the ear of the high priest's slave, an action of mercy and compassion. Particularly, he's acting out his teaching, love your enemies. So Jesus is actually making a miracle here, healing the ear of the high priest slave. Those who came to arrest Jesus include Jewish authorities, and Jesus of Luke's passion announces that it is their hour, that is the hour of darkness, as we have seen in a little bit before, that it is the hour of darkness, the hour of Satan, etc. Now, Peter's denial and Sanhedrin's interrogation, differing from the other Gospels, Jesus is taken to the high priest's house. The judicial trial begins only at the dawn of the next day. We had seen it in Mark and Matthew that it had started the night itself, but here the trial begins dawn of the next day. Here, something very curious is happening at the high priest courtyard. Peter denies Jesus, and Jesus looked at him at the crow of the cock. And in fact, Jesus' look made Peter to weep bitterly. The courtyard is also marked with mockery of Jesus. As the day begins, Jesus is taken to the Sanhedrin, where he is asked of his identity as Messiah and as the Son of God, as in the other Gospels. So here we see Jesus' compassionate look towards Peter that made Peter to weep bitterly. His answers are not clear, but points to the fact that he will face a martyr's death. The interrogations are not that successful because Jesus' answers are not that clear. So differing from Mark and Matthew, Sanhedrin did not condemn Jesus, and one finds no witness to accuse Jesus here. The self-composure of Jesus displays his innocence. So Luke is in fact picturing Jesus as the righteous, innocent man here. So God-given serenity of one to whom the Father has delivered all things is exposed here. Jesus is so self-composed at this trial. Now Jesus is sent to Pilate, and then to Herod, then back to Pilate is seen here. Luke vividly brings two main charges against Jesus, which have both religious and political overtones. First, Jesus claimed that he is the king of the Jews. It has an after effect not only for Jews, but also for the empire, because we learn from John, everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor. The second one is the false accusation that Jesus forbade people to pay taxes. Moreover, the accusation is that Jesus perverted the nation and people. So perverting someone or perverting the nation has got some religious implication, at the same time political implications. In a religious sense, if someone is said to be perverting the nation or people, must be considered a false prophet. In a political level, that person must be considered as a rebellious one, and he must be sentenced to death. Here, crucifixion, death, and burial in Luke. As we all know, Roman crucifixion was notorious. we have Quintilian, the Roman orator, would say, whenever we crucify the guilty, the most crowded roads were chosen, where most people can see and moved by this fear. For penalties relate not so much to retribution as to their exemplary effects. So, differing from Mark and Matthew, here one finds no mocking of Jesus by Roman soldiers after Pilate's sentence. However, Pilate delivering Jesus up to their will, it is written up to their will give the feeling that the sentence was done to appease the Jewish authorities with a connotation to Jesus's innocence. So now the way of cross begins. Both Jesus and people who follow him are more compassionate, enriching each other with their merciful deeds and words. Here, we will see bewailing and lamenting women. Jesus consoles them. The good thief, to him, Jesus would say, "You will be with me in paradise." And the Roman centurion, certainly this man was innocent. So he's proclaiming the innocence of Jesus. And a multitude beating their breast, a sign of repentance. One from the Sanhedrin, Joseph, shows great compassion to the body of Jesus. Most importantly, what is highlighted here is Jesus' prayer. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So this is the most Lucan, fascinating Lucan picture of Jesus's forgiveness. However, we see also negative responses, 3 negative responses there against Jesus' words of forgiveness. Now, Luke differs from Mark and Matthew in certain other matters. It is shown here. In Mark, the tearing of the temple curtain occurs after Jesus' death. In Luke, it comes before Jesus' death. Both Luke and Mark contain material which the other does not provide. Mark recounts the Elijah incident. Luke does not. Luke reports the repentance of the people. Mark does not. And both evangelists narrate similar events but explain or interpret them differently. Luke explains 3 hours of darkness as a failure of the sun. In Mark, there is no attempt at explanation. Women is presented as witnesses, but stood at a distance here too. In Luke, we have an exemplification of Jesus practicing his own teaching. But I say to you that here, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. Maybe because of this forgiveness that is shown throughout the gospel. The gospel is also known as the gospel of universal salvation, the gospel of peace, the gospel of mercy, etc. Now we enter into the final gospel, that is the passion narrative in the Gospel of John. So it's almost 47. The 4th gospel's passion narrative is often called as passionless passion. I would call it as Jesus' journey to the Father than a passion narrative. So most of the scholars would say it's passionless passion, because we don't find that much passion in the Gospel of John, although we call it as passion narrative. It's quite distinct from the synoptic accounts. Jesus is in control of everything what happens. Jesus' foreknowledge of everything that is going to happen is given at the very beginning of the Last Supper account. 13:1, we would say. Before the feast of the Passover, we have a very, very wonderful sentence there. He's very conscious of from where he comes and to where he goes. Death is for him a transition from this world to the Father, but only to come back. We would see that in chapter 10. His death is compared to the grain of wheat that never dies out, but lives through new life which sprang from it. So these are the Johannine view of the death of Jesus. Along with Jesus' hour, it is also the hour of Satan that we had seen it in the Gospel of Luke. We have an introduction introduction to Satan entering into Judas. here we have a more reference to Satan, how he is very active during passion narrative or passion time of Jesus. But he has no authority over Jesus because Jesus has conquered him. Denial, betrayal, and the desertion are known to him and inform the disciples before these happen. The Johannine Jesus has dramatized his death at Last Supper. That's why I always want to begin with the Last Supper whenever we deal with passion narrative. But we don't have enough time to go through all details here. So I also squeezed everything into the very traditional pattern. In the foot washing, we see Jesus is dramatizing his death, and he prepares his disciples to continue his mission of love. In John, the public ministry of Jesus covers 2 Passover feasts and commences a 3rd one here. The passion narrative comes to the climax when Jesus says, "It is finished." John sums up his exegesis of Jesus' passion, death, resurrection with the catchy clause, "Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." Now we start with again the arrest of Jesus in the garden, how Jesus is acting here, and what are the specific characteristics of the characters involved here. The passion scene begins with Jesus and the disciples passing Kidron Valley to Gethsemane, which was known to Judas. We have seen it in Luke also. Therefore, it's not a surprise that Judas comes to the garden with the arresting party. Knowing everything, Jesus himself moves forward to meet Judas. We have been told that Judas went into the night, leaving the true light, Jesus, and he comes back with some artificial light. John does not have Jesus' sorrowful prayer and cry for the removal of the hour, because the Father and the Son are one, and Jesus knew his mission. He knows that he comes to fulfillment of this particular hour. The power of the saying, "I am," of Jesus puts his enemies down to the dust, which indicates that no one takes away life from Jesus unless he wills it. We can also remember the theophanies in the Old Testament here. But Jesus lets go his disciples in consonant with his prayer in chapter 17. Now Jesus is taken to the high priest. Jesus is taken, we have to remember, not to Caiaphas, the high priest, but the father-in-law of Caiaphas, Annas. It was Caiaphas who predicted that one man should die for all people. However, the interrogation happening Annas did not produce much desired effect, and we do not find the we find the self-confident and responding Jesus here. He's not silent as in Mark, Matthew or Luke. Now, Jesus' self-confidence of his identity is contrasted with the disciples' identity of Peter as it is in other Gospels, but with a strong contrast. While Jesus answers, "I am," Peter answers, "I am not." Peter is now reported as standing with those who arrested Jesus. Peter was supposed to be with Jesus. Yeah. 4th Gospel introduced another disciple. We know that by name, the beloved disciple. So he's introduced in chapter 13 for the first time as the beloved disciple, and then we have his presence throughout Jesus's passion story until the death of Jesus. He's present at the critical moments of Jesus' life. We can see I have given the references there. Now, one of the major differences between the synoptics and John is the presentation of the beloved disciple over Peter, whom the synoptics clearly present as the leader of the group. Now we begin the Roman trial. The trial at Pilate is designed in an artistic manner. Brown puts it very well. I would read it out for you because you get a picture of it. This is not at all the synoptic scenario of a Jesus silent before a Pilate, who is interrogating him in the presence of his accusers, the Jewish priests. Rather, it is an elaborate front and backstage setting, with the priests in the crowd outside, Jesus inside, and Pilate shuttling back and forth between them. As he moves from one stage to the other, Pilate is like a chameleon, taking on the different coloration of the parties who engage him. Outside, there is ceaseless pressure, pretension, and outcry. Inside, there is calm and penetrating dialogue. Not at all silent, the Johannine Jesus is an eloquent spokesman, answering the false charges of political complicity that will be brought against his memory during the years to come. He will not refuse the title of the King of the Jews, but the real reason he came to this world is pointed out. It's not to be a king in the worldly understanding. It was to bear witness to the truth. Okay, in this episode, it is Pilate who puts on trial to see what truth is. Pilate is afraid of Jesus, who is the Son of God. So Pilate is in trial here, and he miserably fails. And Jesus is sentenced to death without any crime. He is handed over by the Father himself, although there are quite many subjects are there. John would tell that it is the Father who is actually willed it. Now let me go to the crucifixion, death, and burial. Unlike other Gospels, John does not include a Simon to carry Jesus' cross because it shows Jesus' self-composure. And then Pilate placed the title on the cross in 3 languages that were the important or the languages of the empire: Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. It has a great witnessing effect in the Gospel. Pilate, against the objection of the chief priest, puts the title, exercising his legal power. We have a reference to the seamless robe of Jesus. There are 2 interpretations connected to it: symbol of unity and the symbol of Jesus' priesthood. Therefore, Jesus is not only king, but also priest in the Gospel of John. Now we see that, different from other Gospels, at the foot of the cross, there were quite a number of women and the beloved disciples. And here, according to the theology of John, at the foot of the cross, the church was born. And Jesus entrusts his mother to the beloved disciple and the beloved disciple to the mother. And they are the symbols for the exemplary faith and models of Johannine discipleship. It's beautiful to imagine at the foot of the cross, Mother Mary stands as the mother of the church or the mother of the believing community. Okay. Let me now move on to the contemporary reading of Jesus' Passion. I wanted to say many things here. Maybe I would point out the whole Passion narrative in the Gospel of John framed under the theme of love that we must remember in our mind, or we must keep it in our mind. Okay. So let me just move to, in lack of time, I think we must move to the contemporary reading of Jesus' Passion. We must see 4 Gospels are not 4 chronicles of what happened in the last moments of Jesus. They are theological reflection, interpretation of Jesus' final moments. So they are trying to make meaningful Jesus' suffering and death for the community of believers, unbelieving Jews, and Gentiles. So we need to see the differences of these narratives side by side and need to see humanity as accepting the reality of death and suffering in a different manner. So we have in Mark the crying Jesus, the helplessness of Jesus. So there will be time in our lives where we cry, "Why have you forsaken me, O God?" So for someone who cries in their suffering, the Gospel of Mark is an answer to find consolation. And in the Gospel of Luke, Passion narrative expresses Jesus' passion as Jesus is more compassionate. All the characters who are with Jesus are more compassionate, and Jesus is facing the death in a noble way. So Jesus is compassionate to the failing disciples, reinstate them to the group of the disciples, and accept Jews and Gentiles, respects women's sentimentality, showing compassion to the one who showed a little compassion to him on the cross. He's the friend of the outcasts, sinners, tax collectors. He's a father who waits for the son, lost son, and celebrates when the son was found. Jesus' death heals everything, understands everything, forgives everything, despite every ignorance, weakness, infidelity, and betrayal. It invites us to cross the boundaries and accept the universal brother or sisterhood. The Johannine Jesus is triumphant, overcoming the evil through the perfect act of love. There is no enemy in the Gospel of John, but all are friends. And the beautifully explained what is the meaning of death in the Gospel of John. So Jesus' passion narrative, we find someone who is in control of their life. They could see the real meaning of their lives. And as we are in a time of COVID pandemic, natural calamities and human errors, people and ourselves ask sometimes why this suffering. So we have answers. In which situation we are. Are we in control of ourselves, or are we at the verge of despair? Then we have, for us, there are Gospels. So we must approach these Gospels according to our need. And then I move on to some points regarding passion and the pluralism, the living context of us. Passion and resurrection of Jesus have greater roles in expressing the uniqueness of his person in our pluralistic context. Unlike any other gods, it is Jesus' willingness to suffer for his people that makes him unique among all gods of different religions. Through this, Jesus could definitively converge the gap between what we preaches and what he does. That is, congruence between his words and actions. Therefore, it is the passion of the Lord that makes him unique and relevant among the various divine figures of our pluralistic world. And even this event of Jesus' suffering make the atheist silent about such a self-emptying God who is different from many in many respects. Therefore, it is this newness that one finds in Jesus, a God who gives himself to have life for others, which portrays a unique place for him, and that is the very life must be followed by his disciples. Now we see passion and the discipleship. While the men followers fail in their discipleship, women characters rise in their fidelity to Jesus. Sometimes the women characters also wonder what to do, and they go back to their home. We see that, but even then we see as the gospel narration progresses until John, we find many women at the foot of the cross. They walk with him, cry for him, and suffer with him. Passion shows the pathetic failure of the male disciples. We see that the women at its distance get closer to the cross. When the new community is born, the discipleship also gets new meaning, which include women at every point of community's life. At the foot of the cross, there is no gender bias, no racial discrimination, no caste divisions. Jesus at the cross belongs to everyone. Let the crucified Jesus encourage us to cross all boundaries with perfect love. Now, a few more reflection on passion and power. We see power-hungry, agenda-driven leaders lie and manipulate information to get Jesus away forever. Having the absolute power, Jesus knew the most powerful power in this world is the power of love. In one of his most insightful book, In the Name of Jesus, Henry Newman observed, "What makes the temptation of power so seemingly irresistible? Maybe it is that power offers an easy substitute for the hard task of love. It seems easier to be God than to love God, easier to control people than to love people. So loving others requires that we die to ourselves. Jesus' disciples need to come out of complicated hierarchical structures to the simplicity of life. So these are some of the points I read in relation to the passion narrative in the contemporary living situation. And I think I have used it 2 or 3 minutes more. So let me just conclude. We have been seeing that the passion narrative in all the Gospels, and also the implications that we have in each Gospels, and the characters played there, and also the meaning of it for our life, our discipleship, or in our communities. So that's what I wanted to convey. So we have seen the 4 Gospels. What are the specific or characteristics of each Gospels? Where do they differ? And what are the meanings attached to it? And finally, we came to the conclusion that passion narrative can be interpreted in the key word, love, but that has got very different levels or dimensions. Mark has got one dimension, Matthew has got another dimension, and then the Luke has got another dimension, and John got another dimension. And we need to put all these things together to get the true meaning of the passion narratives in the New Testament. So thank you very much. I think now we may have some questions. So, okay.
I'm so grateful to you, Sister Dr. Bincy Mathew, for your profound and creative presentation. Thank you very much indeed. We sincerely appreciate your knowledge and brilliant mind that you have. Your presentation was inspirational. Your presentation was not just only on passion narratives in the Gospels, but also on various dimensions in historiography, origins and foundations of New Testament theology, methodological dimensions of philosophy, culture, tradition, Hellenistic and Roman empires, which are multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary in nature. Thank you very much for exploring passion narratives in the Gospels by explaining 3 major sections, such as terminology, analysis of 4 Gospels, and contemporary reading of the passion narratives. Thank you for explaining formation of gospel traditions in a systematic way. Before I give time to the audience, let me tell a few instructions. Your question should focus on the topic. Your question should be inclusive. Your question should be precise. Over to the audience.
Okay, I think I have some questions in the chat box. Should I start from there? Okay, one of the questions I see here. How can passion narratives answer the cry of the people today from various walks of life? Okay, so let me answer that question. Passion narratives answer the cry of the people today from various walks of life. Yeah. In the passion narrative, in fact, we have seen Jesus is there crying, or someone followed Jesus is crying. So this is another way of seeing this cry. The question is the cry of the people today from various walks of life. Okay. So many answers are coming to my mind. In fact, the Christian life is an answer or our mission is to continue the mission of Jesus. We all know that. And very especially, Jesus is presented in the Gospel of John as one very vulnerable one. And we would speak today as the vulnerables, the marginalized, etc. in our community. And the Passion narrative, in fact, tells us to hear these cries. So, to a certain extent, we see the passion of Jesus was injustice done to him by many people. Although we would say God wanted him to, God delivered Jesus to the authorities, but at the same time, we must see this was an act of injustice, an act of violence, in fact. We were seeing how the authority played cunningly to arrest Jesus, to get rid of Jesus. So today, it is our responsibility to see that no injustice is done to the vulnerables. So Jesus' passion narrative is, in fact, help us to live for, as a voice for the voiceless, and for the most vulnerable people, to side with him, to stand for them, or to be in their shoes, to understand their pain and then respond. And I cannot go, I wanted to tell so many things, the political things that is happening here, or so many other issues of violence that is happening in our communities or in our countries. We must respond to that situations, and our actual inspiration must come from the passion narrative of Jesus. So it could be a very well narration for us to get be inspired from it and walk for it or work for it. So the second question maybe I would take from here. Okay. Why does the passion begin the Garden of Gethsemane and not the Last Supper? So in fact, in my opinion, I expressed it. I would consider the passion narrative starting from Last Supper onwards, or even just before the anointing scene. And so it's very difficult to make a clear-cut division. Rather, I would suggest you to understand the Gethsemane to burial is actually a kind of traditional understanding, because Jesus is actually facing the death from there onwards, very literally. But we can see that Jesus is always setting his face to experience this one, or he knew it. So it is always better that we start with anointing scene, or even before. It depends on the Gospels. Okay, we must understand that. The Last Supper, in my opinion, Last Supper is the place where we can actually begin the passion narrative, but the other one is very traditional one, and for the time, in order to present it in a acceptable manner, I just took it. But that's what I told. I would like to present. I would consider it as from Last Supper to burial. Yeah. Now the next question. Okay. I don't find any question here. Yeah. As power becomes an easy tool to control and takes over, should we try to replace the hierarchical setup of the institution church? If yes, how? Okay, that's a good question and very difficult to answer. Should we try to replace the hierarchical setup? That's a very difficult question. How do I answer it? Okay, in my mind, it's a sudden answer. In my mind, whenever I think of the abuse of power, it is not only in the church, it is everywhere, even in the family, even in a small group where we are, we see it. So destroying the institutional structures may not end the abuse of power. I think it's not only in the church institution, it is everywhere. But I think there is only one solution to it: all become the disciples of Jesus, Jesus in the passion. Maybe we have to get some kind of inspiration from all these gospels. We may be crying, as I said in the very beginning of the contemporary reading, sometimes we are in a position to cry in our suffering. Sometimes we are in a little bit of control, like in Luke, and sometimes we are okay to suffer, and we are there to fight against all the violence, abuse of power, etc. Then we are there like Johanna and Jesus. So in my opinion, destroying all the institutional aspects of church may not destroy the power structure that is existing everywhere. Okay, now I move on to the next question.
How can passion narratives answer the cry of the people today from various walks of life?
Okay, I answered it, first one. Okay. I answered it already. Yeah. Any other questions? Which yeah, the two more questions are there, but Suguma sir, could you just read it for me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I'm going through.
I cannot see it. Can you just show me? Yeah.
Sure, can I ask?
Yeah, sure.
Minimum, Mathew, ma'am.
Yeah, so. Yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, good evening, sister. Thank you, sister, for going in depth, the Gospels and all about it.
Yeah.
We are really enlightened. And my question is, as you said, the number, you have mentioned the number 3 in the Gospel of Mark. It is very prominent in there. Okay.
Yes.
What is the significance of this number? What we find in the present scenario is, even some institutions, they do not have the number 3 or number 13. So what is the significance of number 3 in Mark's Gospel?
Okay. In fact, this number 3 is used as a kind of, you know, that in biblical understanding, the number 3 is a number of perfection. Yeah. Number 3 is a number of perfection. Especially if we look into the book of Revelation, number 3 is considered as the perfect number. So here we may not see as it is, but somebody is asking question. No, that whenever they use 3, we can understand that it is to balance things. Okay, so and also we need to understand a kind of, this is a literary feature of Mark to present everything in a number 3 manner, a kind of pattern. It gives more balance in their understanding. If we present things as in a group of 3, then it is more balanced. So that is the reason they use 3. And today, number 13, we know that a fear of number 13, that's we are seeing everywhere, and that is just a kind of blind belief, I would say. Okay, so that is the reason Mark uses number 3. Any more questions?
Reverend Sargunam was raising his hand.
Yeah, somebody.
Yes, sister.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah. Sometimes we are preaching the death of Jesus is the will of God.
Yeah.
According to our Gospels, is it right?
It's a difficult question. You know, I'm entering into another minefield now. But anyway, I would answer, in all the Gospels, it is also the will of God. Will of God, because we have the word handed over, paradidomi, a Greek word we use. I see so many books, so you know it's already there. So paradidomi is, in fact, the subjects are different persons, Judas, Pilate, Jewish authorities, etc. But in almost all the Gospels, we see that it is the Father himself handing over Jesus. So the subject of that particular verb is God the Father. So we can understand that somehow. But when I say it with reluctance, because in the popular piety, this can mean accepting everything as God's will. That's not right. We see also the violence. You see, Jesus is responding in Luke and John. Jesus is much more responding. He has voice and he questions, and he puts Pilate in trial to see the real truth. So we should not accept all kinds of violence as God's will. Rather, we must question it. But in the case of Jesus, we must understand that this is also will of God, because it was the deliverance or the redemption or the salvation was through Jesus' suffering. So the Father can be considered as one of the subject of the word paradidomi, the handing over. It's difficult to answer, as you know. It has got so many other things related to it. How do we view? I remember in one of my, my dissertation is on the foot washing narrative, and my promoter was so particular to tell me every time, Bincy, there was so much violence in Jesus' death, and we should not accept everything as God's will. And I'm pondering over it many times to get a clear answer to it. And I know that it is difficult, because it's not that balanced, and not, it was not a question that the evangelist handled, but they gave it in a very confused way to understand. But that would be my answer. We must understand that way, but at the same time, we should not take it as for granted to accept all kinds of violence exerted to us.
Yeah. Thank you so
Thank
much
you for your question.
We have a lot of questions, but time is also there. We'll give last question to Ma'am Jane James. This will be the last question.
Yeah.
Ma'am, unmute and raise your question, please.
Thank you, sister, for the wonderful class you gave to us, wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
Really insightful, it's authoritative and excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, ECC, for bringing such a scholar to us. Thank you so much, ECC.
Thank you.
Okay, my question is, you said that at the foot of the cross, the church was born.
Oh, yeah.
And Mother Mary considered as the mother of the church.
Yes.
Please explain on that.
I know that you would love this subject. Okay. It is actually in the Gospel of John, chapter 19, we see at the very last moment of Jesus, Mother Mary and beloved disciples and some of the women are present there. It is there on the cross. Jesus is actually telling the beloved disciples, or she is actually entrusting mother of Jesus's, or Mother Mary is always called as mother of Jesus in the Gospel of John. So Jesus is entrusting mother to beloved disciple and beloved disciple to Mother Mary. And who is this beloved disciple? He's a representative figure, in my opinion. Was he one of the 12? Some would say yes, some would say no. And I think that's not very important to answer this question. We need to remember the moment of death of Jesus. He breathes and he tells it is finished. Okay, he breathes. It reminds us the book of Genesis, where the Spirit was hovering over. And it is the moment, in fact, according to the theology of the Gospel of John, the resurrection, everything happens there at in the cross. And Jesus' side is pierced and blood and water comes out from there. So all these are very symbolic, and we need to understand everything. According to scholars, it was the real moment of the birthing of the church. And those who are present here at the foot of the cross are the real new members of this new community. And who is the mother there, or mother of the church, is actually mother of Jesus. And to this mother, the whole community is entrusted. And I don't know whether we in fact studied deeper into it to bring out the importance of women in the church, or maybe women in the decision-making process, and women in the institutional level. Various churches have got a different opinions on it. But in my opinion, we must study this into detail to include women in every walk of church's life. Mother Mary stands, and also we need to remember the failure of the male disciples. I'm not telling women are also failing, and men are also failing, but we need to remember how they are brought and who were there at the last very moment of Jesus. And Mark, Matthew, and John presents women at a distance. So, John is presenting them at the foot of the cross. Mark, Matthew, and Luke, women at a distance, looking or witnessing everything. And in the Gospel of John again, it is Mary Magdalene is sent to announce the first resurrection narrative. So it is not to any men here. I'm just telling my feeling here to understand the narrative intricacies here. We need to really break the God of what God wants to say in this particular narrative at the foot of the cross. We need to really interpret this one. So according to scholars, cross is where the church is born, or Jesus' death. The moment of death is actually the realization of everything. And it is there the church is born. So Mother Mary is the mother of the church in that new community. Okay.
Thank you very
So
much.
unfortunately, that was the last question. Okay.
Sister Dr.
I just want
Bincy
hello, sister.
for the brilliant presentation.
Thank you.
You deserve a great salute from all of us. Before I
Thank you very much for
announcements, shall we all raise our hands and wave as a sign of respect?
oh, thank you.
Thank you very much, sister. You
Thank
did
you.
a fantastic job.
Thank you.
And now I give this time to Professor Dr. Thomas for the announcements of the next webinar.
Maybe a moment for me. I would like to thank everyone, very especially Sukuma sir for moderating the session very well. Thank you for helping me when initially I had some troubles, and you were very patient. And also I saw Father Mathew Chandragunel's face sometime. And he is also my professor when I was doing my BTH. Thank you, Professor Dr. Mathew Chandragunel. And also I thank Professor Johnson Thomas Kuti. Yeah, Johnson Thomas Kuti. So for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to give this paper. Thank you very much for your patient listening and also all the questions. Thank you very much. So over to, yeah.
So friends, we had a very wonderful presentation this evening too. And today's presentation was an excellent one.
Sir, would you kindly raise your volume, please?
Yeah, today's presentation was an excellent one. And you see that we could see the nuances in the four Gospels, okay, in which how the passion narratives are narrated, okay, and portrayed very well. As you know that the Gospel of Mark is considered as a Gospel of power, and at the same time a Gospel of passion, that means suffering. So Mark is a Gospel where you see that, okay, it is considered as a quickly moving drama where the cross is placed at the climax. So one important thing I have seen is that this lecture gave us a broader picture about the passion of Jesus, most significantly about how the passion can be interpreted, okay, in relationship with the contemporary realities. That is the most important thing. So when we come to the synoptic gospel, see that there is more emphasis on the resurrection of Jesus. But when we come to the Gospel of John, more emphasis is on the death of Jesus. Okay, the readers are prepared right from the beginning toward the passion of Jesus in John's Gospel, especially through the continuing expressions like the hour of the Son of Man, the glorification of the Son of Man, and the lifting up of the Son of Man. So in that case, when we come to John's Gospel, is that death is just an extension. Sorry, the resurrection of Jesus is just an extension to the passion. So is that in that way we could see the myriad pictures of the passion narratives in the four Gospels. We have to appreciate our dear Dr. Sister Bincy Mathew for giving us an erudite lecture that gave us a broader picture about the passion of Jesus in the four Gospels. So when I talk about the next lecture, that is going to be on 20th August, another eminent scholar who is none other than Professor Jayasheelan Kanagaraj. And he is going to give us the next episode, that is the resurrection of Jesus in the four Gospels. The resurrection of Jesus in the four Gospels. So today's question is, assignment is, write a short reflection on the passion of Jesus in the four Gospels in the context of suffering, persecution, and gender bias. Okay, in 300 words based on the lecture today. Okay, once again I repeat it. Write a short reflection on the passion of Jesus in the four Gospels in the context of suffering, persecution, and gender bias. May God bless you.
Thank you.